Howdy, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, Stacy, I was thinking about this whole world economy and the way things are going, and it's like we're flying over the Bermuda Triangle, you know, and all the dials and everything, and the dashboard are going in opposite directions. Are we going upside down? Are we upside up? We're not sure. It's like all so frickin' confusing.
That's because things are getting real, and we're seeing what some in the alternative finance space would call a fourth turning. There's a huge shift going on. We've been covering it here for 10 years, the whole process of deglobalization and de-dollarization. De-dollarization, of course, has been happening, as we all see, around the world as central banks start accumulating gold. Then we've seen the deglobalization, and Trump and Brexit were a sign of that, but now, of course, it's accelerating rapidly thanks to this pandemic. And I want to look at how the break in this supply chain, the global supply chain happening right now, is with the most fundamental resource of all, and that is money. And it's being called unobtanium and unobtanium inside the mad shortage in gold, the ultimate doomsday prepper asset. Of course, we've seen shortages across all sort of commodities, especially in the agricultural sector, whether you can find whole wheat flour or milk or eggs at the local supermarket. It's very difficult, but there's a mad scramble, as you said, with the billionaire class who treat gold as their toilet paper.
Yeah, there are some crazy prices out there. So gold is hard to obtain. You're paying for spot gold. You're paying for ounces of gold, $2,000, $2,100, $2,200 for an ounce of gold at a gold dealer, and elsewhere things are crashing in price. So again, the cockpit of the crazy machine is showing all kinds of bad info.
That's true. And it's funny that a lot of people will say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, that even what they see right in front of them, that they see that gold price, that there was some sort of break in the contract on the COMEX, that they're having to change the contract that has been in operation for dozens of years, that they're now using different delivery size bars. You know, they're using the 400 ounce from London rather than the 100 ounce from New York, that all that sort of stuff is going. But if you go to eBay, for example, and you know, there's a certain brand of wheat flour that sells for $3 for 2 pounds. You can't find it in your local supermarket, but if you go to eBay, you can find it for $33 to $55. So that suggests there's a shortage somewhere, right? That people are willing to pay up to that many times over because of this break in the supply chain. And what we're seeing is that as people are starting to realize that printing won't get us out of this, situation, you're seeing a mad dash for gold, and you're seeing the fact that it's also meeting the supply issue of flights, because gold suppliers are in talks to use chartered or cargo flights to transport the precious metal, which usually moves around the world in commercial planes and has been left stranded as global trade grinds to a halt.
The gold market is antiquated. You know, hasn't been updated for decades, and so the way that the various contracts are settled, paper contracts, are in different size bars, and this wasn't a problem because nobody took delivery of these gold products. They just took delivery of paper for decades because of the gold bullion banks and the miners and the derivative traders were all kind of working together, or colluding, some might say, to satisfy their own interests that were not necessarily in the interest of people that were looking to operate in an economy that's based on hard money, if you catch my drift. And now that people are asking physical demand, the demand of the physical gold, they find out that the logistics and the way these contracts are constructed are completely misaligned, and they're having a real logistic problem. And you don't have this problem with Bitcoin, do you? You know, this really shows another huge reason why gold is inferior to Bitcoin in many ways. But don't tell Peter Schiff. He's living in his own dream world.
And there's a sort of weird denial that's been going on since January. You and I were reporting here on Keiser Report that surely the entirety of China, especially Wuhan region, the Hubei province, being totally shut down, surely that's going to have some impact eventually, right, on the supply. That's where we make everything. And the world just kept on going around their business as if it was all going to be normal, because the central bank, there's always a central bank put. The Fed always comes in and rescues us with more money. And the more money has been an answer for decades, for the last 2 decades. Anytime things go wrong, even if it's something like an attack like 9/11, they print money and it all goes away. And here we see one thing that I've been kind of sitting around for 2.5 months waiting for some sort of solution, is it's quite clear that we need personal protection equipment, especially face masks. The economy of Japan is like the 3rd largest in the world, 2nd largest in the world. The economy of Singapore, the economy of South Korea have not had to do total shutdowns like us. They haven't had to do it. Why? Because they have 73-cent masks, enough for all of their population to use that and thus avoid pandemic spreading. So here's a great meme to explain the situation that America's in the process of deglobalization and de-dollarization. Easier to print money than making masks. That's Drake in the famous meme doing at the mask, and of course loving the money printer go brrr.
It's interesting because in the substrata of the stack that we call the American economy, deep down in the bowels, is a layer of lawyers. And America is famous being highly litigious. Everyone's suing everybody. And so why are there no masks? Why were there no cockpit door locks before 9/11, even though it was an easy fix and everyone kind of knew that this was a risk? But because of the lawyers, because of the litigious risk, because it's a lot easier just to print money and then say, well, we did everything we could because it's an immaculate solution. Nobody sues the government for printing money. But if a huge chain of grocery stores allowed for one store to have masks and another store didn't have masks, then the people who didn't get masks would sue the grocery store, and they'd be tied up in court and litigation for years and years. So I thought, this might be a good opportunity in America to get rid of all those lawyers. That would be hugely beneficial.
Well, I also think it's part of this deglobalization, de-dollarization situation. We've had globalization and dollarization, financialization of the global economy because it's the U.S. empire. And we've been able to run this empire where we get to, like most empires before us, whether it was the Spanish or the Roman, everybody else does the work. And then after a generation or two, you forget how everything is made. And you feel like you start to feel a divine right of king sort of thing, that you're born to rule, you eat well, you eat arugula and avocados, and you eat at nice restaurants, and you are superior, obviously, to the Uber driver or the Instacart delivery person. And this is a divine and as it should be situation until it suddenly isn't. So with the masks, they're all made in Hubei. We shut down Hubei, and obviously there are no masks anymore. So we're all the elite, all the wealthy, all the so-called entrepreneurs of the industrialists, they're nowhere to be found because we don't have them anymore in America. So everybody's sitting around waiting for these masks to be delivered. Everybody's sitting around waiting for food to appear on the supermarket shelves when they're counting on somebody who is not valued in this economy, and an economy that is financialized, that is based on the dollar. It doesn't value all those people that we as a society, 340 million people here in America, cannot exist right now. We cannot function without all those people who are delivering the goods and also packaging the products and to sell to us, to give to us.
We often say on this show how the Black Plague, Europe, created the middle class because it was the shortage of workers after the plague that then gave workers some bargaining ability, and we had the beginning, therefore, of the middle class, what we know as the middle class, and the end of kind of the lord and serf model. Excuse me?
End of feudalism.
Right, the end of feudalism. Exactly. Good one.
I always forget that word for some reason.
I know, it's got 2 vowels right there after the initial consonant, and that can be mind-numbing. And but nevertheless, it is now a time in America for the serf class. The workers who are making minimum wage but can't survive, they have to have 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs. They're rising up. They're going on strike. So one of the fallouts of the COVID-19 plague will be much higher wages, long overdue, which, this is the way nature is. This is the way Gaia throws down.
Boomers have enjoyed the benefits of a financialized all-dollar system since 1971. They were the first in. They were 20 years old when that happened. Well, the 20-year-olds now are the Generation Z, and this is a huge radical shift, as radical as what happened in 1971, and they are in control. If you want them to come bring you food, you're going to have to give them some money because they're just going to sit out there with a bag of food and say, how much are you going to give me? there is one thing that is also unobtanium, even though the price keeps dropping. So if you look at gasoline prices here in America, nearby it's only like $1.75, $1.80 to go fill up your, your tank per gallon. Well, oil prices keep on going down, so down that again it's like Bermuda Triangle crazy. Mind-blowing deflation. Physical crude price, Wyoming sour, trades at negative 19 cents per barrel. Wyoming sweet is at $3 per barrel. Oklahoma sour, $5. Canadian Western, $5. All U.S. and global yields can fall close to zero as inflation dropping faster than rate cuts. And these are more in that whole fracking patch and the tar sands up in Canada. So their cost of production was only possible because of the negative interest rates, the free money, the financialization, the dollarization of the world. Now, as things get real, as everything is topsy-turvy in this Bermuda Triangle world, this is the sort of crazy you see.
Well, as we pointed out in the past, for every barrel of oil, there's 60,000 barrels of paper oil. Just like for every ounce of gold, there are thousands of ounces of paper gold. And that's where price is discovered, is in the derivatives market. And now the gold market, which is pari passu with the banking industry, when both collapse simultaneously, they become coterminous. Then you have weird, freaky Bermuda Triangle-like pricing that throws off signals that no economist is prepared to talk about on mainstream media, only through shows like this, that we've been actually prepping people for 10 years to get ready for the psychotic post-modern world. Can anyone even begin to wrap their mind? It's about confusing futile with futile. Don't do it. They're two separate words. And when we come back after the break, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Jim Kunstler of Kunstler.com, author of a new book, which is very timely, Living in the Long Emergency. James Howard Kunstler, welcome back.
Hi, Max. Nice to see you virtually.
Well, you predicted it. You've been talking about it. You've been writing about it. And now we're here. We're in the long emergency. And Trump wants to make it a short emergency. Your thoughts on the disintegration of the economy and all of our, quote, just-in-time supply chains? Jim, your thoughts?
I don't know. Kind of hard to blame Trump for wanting to make it a short emergency, but, whether he can or not is another matter. It seems to me that we've really come to an inflection point where an awful lot of the arrangements that have made us comfortable are probably going to have to change. And we really don't know how we're going to do that because, we're really kind of stuck in the methods and operations that we're used to. And we haven't even begun to imagine making new arrangements for things.
It's like when I hear Trump say that he wants to be a short pandemic, it's like watching Charlton Heston as Moses, parting the Red Sea and commanding this to happen, and it's ludicrous. It shows tremendous hubris, and I think that's part of the problem. Now, New York is one of the biggest economies in the world and in the U.S. 18% of GDP in America is healthcare, and yet the healthcare workers in the best hospitals are wearing garbage bags for protection. What's going on here, Jim?
Well, probably more evidence of what was a racketeering operation in medicine. And, one of their prime goals over the last 20, 30 years was to just optimize the efficiencies of their corporate operations rather than, optimizing the delivery of real health services. So, they decided, well, maybe we don't need this equipment, maybe we don't need the gowns, maybe we don't need the masks, so, we'll save 1% of our operating capital by, not getting it. So it's pretty easy to understand. If you recognize that medicine has been a racketeering operation for quite a few years, it's quite easy to understand.
Now, last week, 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment, and stock markets had one of its biggest rallies in history. There's always this odd relationship between Main Street and Wall Street. They tend to be mutually exclusive. When Main Street's doing well, Wall Street tends to go down, and vice versa. But for the past 20 or 30 years, it's been all Wall Street, no Main Street. And we've saw stark evidence again of this with a 3 million print on the unemployment number. Markets scream higher. But that's not a surprise. That's exactly what's been going on for a couple of decades now, Jim.
It's only more emphatic now because you can see that the reality of human activity has been reduced to zero. So there is absolutely no relationship now between what happens in finance and what happens on the ground with people doing stuff and producing stuff, or in this case, not producing stuff. Finance is now completely divorced from the reality of human activity and human production.
It's very difficult for people to grasp that point, just like it's very difficult for people to grasp the exponential nature of the pandemic and how the infected cases double every, whatever it is, 6 or 7 days. And it's projected that in the U.S. we're going to see millions of cases, and we're going to see in the globe many millions of cases. It's hard to wrap your mind around the mathematics there. And so, too, it's hard for people to understand how the worse the economy gets, the better it is for Wall Street, because they can go to the central bank and plead poverty, and the central bank is always got the open spigot of fresh cash. Will there ever be a time when the central bank says no, that the central bank says, wait a minute, we can't debase the currency forever? Do you think that'll ever happen in our lifetimes, Jim?
Oh, absolutely, because, you know, what you're suggesting, implied in your question is that there wouldn't be any consequences for any of this. But there will be. I mean, I think we'll see the time not far off when all of the unemployed, hungry people on Long Island, you know, march to the Hamptons and go after the hedge funders. You know, that's hardly out of the question. And the other consequence will be, you know, they can keep on printing and channel stuffing and jamming new money from thin air into these various places that they're jamming it. But if they keep on doing that long enough, the dollar won't be worth anything, and it won't matter. It won't matter how much they print, because, you know, all the money they print will be worthless money. And as we both know, there are two ways that you can go broke. You can either have no money, or you can have plenty of money that's worthless.
Exactly. Hyperinflation, currency collapse. You know, it's shocking to me that how the mainstream media plays into the worst tendencies of the kleptocrats. Let's take an example. You mentioned the hedge funds there a moment ago. Let's take an example of a hedge fund guy, Bill Ackman. He was recently on CNBC. They gave him a platform for the full half hour, crying, literally crying about how horrible the stock market is going to be. And sure enough, it was an act. He was short the S&P 500, and he cashed in for over $1 billion in less than a week. So this is an example of what we on Wall Street used to call short and distort. Okay, it's illegal, or at least it used to be. For many years, you're not allowed to really manipulate markets in this obvious way. And I don't blame Bill Ackman for being a sleazebag, but CNBC, to give him a platform for a half hour to conduct a massive fraud like that? I mean, what's the world coming to?
It's hard to imagine what the world's coming to in journalism. You know, it's obviously reached a pretty dark place, and not just in financial reporting, but especially in political reporting. And, you know, one thing that tells you is you have to go looking for sound information in other places than the New York Times and cable TV. So, you know, it's really as simple as that. It's a little bit hard to tell why and how it came to be okay for people in those positions to operate in such extreme bad faith and dishonesty. But I suppose that that's just another matter of a cultural consensus forming. You know, societies give themselves permission, in effect, to behave a certain way. And to some extent, the election of Donald Trump gave the media, the mainstream legacy news media, permission to lie and be dishonest and act in bad faith about just about everything. And they're just continuing that now, kind of out of habit. It's a reflex for them now. But it's very dangerous for our society.
Yeah, I would agree. By the way, I've just been told Bill's last name is Ackman. So just small correction on that. But you remember, and it was the, Bastiat, who, I could be messing up his name too, but who warned about the ravages of plunder. When plunder becomes a way of life, it infects the entire society. If you have plunder at the top, you're going to see plunder at the bottom. You're going to see looting at the bottom. When you have guys like Bill Ackman obviously plundering the system in a hellacious hoax and fraud, why should we expect the hoi polloi and the plebs not to do the equal measures of plunder?
Well, I suppose that there's going to be a certain amount of disorder, and that will include a reaction against this kind of plunder and this kind of opportunism. We must bear in mind the fact that there are, scores of millions of Americans out there who are not in finance and not in political power, but who are plenty smart, plenty intelligent enough to know when they're being played, and they're pretty well armed. And, sooner or later, some of the disorder that we are inviting into our lives is going to express itself in probably an angry rebellion. This is certainly this is the moment of the greatest uncertainty in our lifetimes. And it's hard to say where this is going to go, but the potential for disorder is really enormous.
Well, we saw a movement start with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And we've been covering on our show the global insurrection against banker occupation. We've had you on many, many times. Your work has always tied the ecological emergency with the financial emergency and how those two interact with each other. And now, we're at the point where your prophecy, I don't want to, put too fine a point on it, but your work of the long emergency, this is where we're at. So I ask you, what's going to happen next?
It's been kind of weird for me, too, because I feel like I'm living in a prequel of my own books. I wrote a 4-novel series of books about a fictionalized American economic collapse, and it took place in the aftermath of that. It was called The World Made by Hand series. So I feel like I'm living in the prequel of those novels. And really what happens next is that history really compels us to make different choices and different arrangements. And these mainly revolve around the necessity of downscaling our activities to make them consistent, to make them comport with the capital and resource realities that we're moving into, and to become more local, and to expect that the trust horizon for large institutions, whether it's federal government or any distant thing that's running your life, that's going to dissolve. And you're going to have to become much more interdependent with the people around you. I think the catch is really how are we going to rebuild our local networks of production and interdependence in the USA? Because that's where we're going. That's where the journey is taking us. There are tremendous opportunities in that for young people to go into business locally in one way or another to rebuild these complex, fine-grained networks of making things, growing things, distributing things. And I hope that people see where those opportunities are. The other catch in that is that there is liable to be a period of considerable disorder between the time that we recognize where this journey is taking us and where we're at now at the sort of beginning of the dissolution of our former arrangements.
Well, America is, all about manifest destiny, and we have no borders. We have no limits. It's our world. Everyone's just a guest of America. How are we going to make the transition to living like Japanese people in origami shoeboxes? I don't know how that's going to work in America.
Well, we're not necessarily going to be living like people in other cultures. We will have a version of our own downscaled American culture, and it can be a very fine culture, as our culture was a very fine culture before we got to this hypertrophic place that we're at now. This hyper-complicated and hyper-complex society that we've ginned up. So we can get there. We're still going to find joy and existence in being in this marvelous reality of this world that we're in. But it's going to take hard work, and it's going to take becoming upright people rather than people who indulge in bad faith and dishonesty. And it's going to, really challenge our moral and ethical scheme of things. And a new scheme will emerge. This is an emergent process, meaning that Americans will respond to what reality is asking them to do, and what it is compelling them to do. And we will make new arrangements for things.
James Howard Kunstler, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
It's a pleasure to talk to you always, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, James Howard Kunstler of Kunstler.com. If you want to reach us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.